Welcome to today's episode of The American Paradox, where we're diving into pressing social issues facing the United States today. I'm your host, Li Qing from Beijing Review, China's national English language news weekly. Today we're talking about the US-triggered trade war with China and its impact on American soybean farmers. Joining me is Einar Tangen, an American economic commentator based in Beijing. Einar, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Let's start with some recent news. Reuters reported on December 2nd that shipments of U.S. crops to China are accelerating after a tense tariff war had stalled trade for months, with at least 6 bulk cargo vessels scheduled to load with soybeans at Gulf Coast terminals through mid-December. Some see this as a thaw in trade tensions. What's your take, Anna?
These deals are symbolic, not structural. The U.S. soybeans remain more expensive than Brazilian beans. China paid premiums of $2.20 to $2.30 per bushel versus $1.80 for Brazilian supplies. Commercial buyers are still going to prefer Brazil because margins on U.S. beans are not financially viable. So while this looks like a diplomatic gesture, it doesn't reverse the long-term trend.
But some still see potential for growth. Andrew Moore from the American Soybean Association spoke with Beijing Review in Shanghai in November and was optimistic about China's demand for U.S. soybeans. Here's what he said.
Definitely while I've been here, I've seen and heard that the middle class increase in number of middle class people in China is going from 400 million to 800 million. The Chinese population is demanding high quality animal proteins, or pork, poultry, and other products like that. We know that U.S. soy plays a vital role in growing out and producing that livestock. So I see potential growth in China significantly going up for demand for soybean products. So as for the short term, the stormy seas that we've been in with public policy and other things, the farmer, we don't want to get distracted by that, because the U.S. farmer is resilient in what we do. We're able to grow a crop that's consistent, that's high quality. This year we had to adapt. We had to put it into storage on farms or other places. We're ready to continue to sell to China like we've done in the past.
Anna, what's your response to Andrew's optimism?
China has diversified away from U.S. suppliers, and Brazil is now the dominant player, exporting a record 110 million tons this year compared to the U.S., which is struggling to regain lost ground. Once you lose a market like China, it's hard to get it back, because competitors like Brazil and Argentina invest heavily to fill the gap. With almost all year-round production, Brazil gets more use from its supply chain infrastructure investments versus America's aging but expensive logistics system. Most importantly, Brazil produces cheaper, unsubsidized crops than the U.S. can. So the long-term situation looks grim for American farmers.
The U.S. government rolled out relief programs like the Market Facilitation Program. Did that aid effectively reach struggling farmers?
The Market Facilitation Program, MFP, was massive, over $23 billion in Trump's first term and expanded later, but it was deeply flawed. Most of the money went to large agribusinesses and wealthy farms, not small family operations. Less than 4% reached historically underserved farmers. Some payments even went to foreign-owned companies like JBS, a Brazilian meat giant. Meanwhile, small farmers continue to face existential threats. Aid replaced market income with subsidies, which farmers dislike because they'd rather compete in open markets, because that's the long-term vision. These subsidies are effectively a tax on Americans. They don't restore lost markets. They create dependency without solving structural problems. So keep in mind that they were paid for by tariffs, which simply hit the pockets of Americans, reducing the amount they can buy.
Marc Elrich, County Executive of Montgomery County, Maryland, also highlighted how domestic policies, not just a tariff war, have been damaging to agriculture. He spoke to Beijing Review during the 7th China-U.S. Sister Cities Conference in Hangzhou, China, in October. Here's what he had to say.
We're not a major agricultural center, but we have a third of the county is in agriculture. Some of the crops no longer have a market here. So that obviously affects them. I think that we're still waiting to see the effect of tariffs. They have not fully, the price increases have not fully made their way through the supply chain. So we're not seeing everything yet, but we know there's an anticipation that inflation will be driven upward by the impact of tariffs, and that will affect industries. Companies that may not be allowed to have partnerships or further partnerships would be hurt by that. So we're just at the stage right now of trying to monitor what's happening, and we pay attention to the data. We're actually more damaged by some of the domestic policy than the international policy of our country. That's had serious impacts, or will have serious impacts on our economy. And like everybody else, people are looking at the rising prices of food. We were hoping that, agricultural exchange would increase supply and keep market under more control. Shortages obviously drive prices.
Let's take a step back. How has the trade war actually impacted U.S. soybean farmers, especially small family farms and rural communities?
The impact has been devastating. Before the trade war, China bought about 60% of U.S. soybean exports. When tariffs hit, Chinese purchases dropped to near zero for months, forcing prices down and leaving farmers with unsold crops. Many small family farms operated on thin margins, so this shock triggered a wave of bankruptcies and even suicides. Farm bankruptcies nearly doubled in some quarters, and mental health advocates report rising suicide rates among farmers. Rural communities that depend on agriculture saw ripple effects. Equipment dealers, grain elevators, local businesses all suffered.
Anna, what do you think was really behind Washington's decision to launch this tariff war?
Trump approaches trade like a real estate deal. Cash flow and leverage. He believes tariffs would force companies to relocate production to the U.S. and make America, quote, win. But tariffs are regressive taxes. They raise costs for consumers and businesses. His simplistic view ignored global supply chains and the reality that shifting production is costly and slow. Instead of boosting U.S. manufacturing, tariffs have increased costs for imported materials and intermediate parts and trigger retaliation that is crushing American exports, especially agriculture. In essence, soybeans are collateral damage and a geopolitical gamble.
Looking ahead, what should the U.S. government do to create a healthier international trade environment for its soybean farmers?
First, stop using farmers as pawns in trade wars. Rebuild trust with trading partners through stable, rules-based agreements. Second, invest in competitiveness, logistics, technology, and sustainability so U.S. products remain attractive globally. Third, diversify markets beyond China to reduce vulnerability. And finally, address structural issues at home. Rural infrastructure, mental health support, and fair access to aid for small farms. Farmers want markets, not bailouts. If Washington doesn't pivot, rural America faces an existential crisis.
Finally, let's leave on a forward-looking note. Here's more again on the future of China-U.S. soybean trade.
For us, so for the U.S. soy farmer, we're excited about the changes that we see that are happening over here, the increase in demand. No doubt that this is a place that we want to ship soybeans to. We're waiting for that person to press the go button on it. We're waiting for the full details of that for the next 3-4 months. We're hoping that's going to start sooner than later. And we're excited about the 25 million metric tons commitment that China has made for the next 3 years per year. And so I look forward to the next 40 years, 50 years that we're going to continue to work with China on U.S. soy sales. So the future is bright. The future is strong. It's just we got to figure out how to get everything rolling and get all those details worked out.
That's it for this episode of The American Paradox. What do you think? Let us know. This podcast is produced by Beijing Review. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who is interested in this topic. I'm Li Qing. Until next time, stay curious.